Pat, we had a viewer, a very astute viewer who I have to thank for putting some real thought into this, suggested that we do an episode on scud running. And scud
Oh,
running is one of those topics that I got to admit, it's near and dear to my heart because it's such a problem. Um, the FAA says 17% of GA accidents are CFIT, controlled flight into terrain, and a percentage of those are due to scud running. And what's so bad about it? They're over 50% fatal. So this is that thing that people are like, well, it's not that far or it's not as low as I thought. I can make this. And man, making that leap of faith is really treacherous. Have you ever had personal experience with scud running that maybe developed into a CFIT accident?
not I don't not that I can remember any firsthand knowledge of someone that actively tried to scud run and ended up in that situation. I can tell you one time a number of years ago, and this has been many years ago, 15, 20 maybe. I decided one morning I would fly my airplane out to our glider port where I was due to be the tow pilot on duty that day. And I took off, and it was nice outside, but this is before I really started to realize the importance of that temperature and dew point spread. And by the time I got to the glider club, I was kind of on top of at least a broken layer, but I spotted a hole big enough that I thought was legal to be able to get back down through, and started to circle down and broke out, if you will. I mean, I was never IMC, but broke out at about 600 feet. And fortunately, I was just a mile or so from the club, and there weren't any obstructions there. But wow, I look back at that after that happened and just how monumentally stupid that was. And had never done it before, and certainly haven't done it since. But that would probably be the only. That's probably the only experience that I can think of personally on a scud running deal. It was just a stupid decision.
Well, I'll tell you, for me, this goes back even farther than 15, 20 years. This goes back to the summer of 1966. The
Oh,
Beatles were still together.
whoa.
I came across a Cessna 172 in the woods on Mount Higbee in central Connecticut. And it was inverted about 50 degrees nose down. And the inside, the headliner, was just soaked in blood and hair and handprints. And this is really a vivid thing for me. I remember this really, really clearly. Didn't find out what happened for years afterwards, but the deal had been two guys, best friends. One's a pilot, one's not. They flew out to Block Island for the weekend. Block Island is a beautiful little place off the coast of potentially Rhode Island. Sometimes
Yeah.
there's a fight over who owns Block Island, but there's no bridge. You take a ferry or you fly, and there's an airport right at the center of the island on the high point. Well, Monday morning comes and they've got to get to work. And, in August in that part of the world, the sun comes up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. So plenty of time to get from there back to Hartford, where they had come out of. It's not even a long flight, half an hour maybe. They're flying a 172. The problem is the weather's absolute crap. I mean, it's really crap, but got to get to work, got to do it. So
Yeah.
they took off, and the normal flight would be to take off and fly right up the Connecticut River Valley. Hartford is right next to the river, so it's cake. It's easy navigation, but the visibility was so bad and the ceiling was so low. Apparently, they couldn't fly up the valley, so they flew along the coast until they got to New Haven, where Interstate 91 is. And 91 runs right through New Haven and right next to Brainerd Airport in Hartford. So they decided to follow the highway. And apparently, we're doing a pretty good job until the highway jogs around Mount Higbee.
Oh, no.
They impacted 40 feet below the summit, which put them at less than 900 feet. These guys were in cruise at less than pattern altitude, just trying to thread their way home. They're only 15 miles from home. The pilot was killed in the accident, and this is the horrific part. The passenger survived, but they hadn't filed a flight plan. They hadn't talked to anybody on the radio. Nobody knew where they were. And for 6 days, that passenger was trapped in the airplane, trying his best to get out, dealing with the heat and the dehydration and the lack of food and shock and all that. He was still alive when they found the airplane 6 days later, died in the hospital.
Oh,
But this is just, and it was 0-0 when they hit that mountain. I mean, there was just no visibility. The pilot had 53 hours, Pat, and they let that "I got to get home" thing get ahead of them. They flew right by Westerly, Rhode Island, where they could have landed. They flew by New London. They flew by Groton. They flew by New Haven. They could have landed several places and rented a car. But people get so fixated on getting home, they start to ignore that the ceilings are coming down and the visibility is getting worse. And this is getting really dangerous. Even the FAA says when you're in a situation like that, don't worry about FAA enforcement. Make a decision, turn around, and be safe. And
right.
that's such an important lesson. And I was a CFI up there later in life, and I used to fly over that mountain every day. And I would told every student about that, just to let them know this is not a random CFI thing. Just, hey, don't scud run. This is
No.
like more than 50% of scud running CFIT accidents are fatal. This is a really high risk environment. Just don't do it.
Well, it's planned continuation bias. If you want to put a name on it, the get home-itis thing, it can often be attributed to expectation bias. I can make it home. Planned continuation bias. I don't have a plan B. I've got to get where I'm going. As you were telling that story, it reminded me actually of an experience that I had as a very, very young pilot. This is probably in maybe the very early 70s. I had only had my private ticket for a couple of years, and I remember hearing on the news that a pilot and her family had been killed in an aircraft accident at my home airport in Marshall, Michigan. And they had come in to eat at a local restaurant, which has a national reputation. And they were flying back home, and the weather was bad. I don't know if the woman was instrument rated or not. Those details are foggy, but she took off, became disoriented, and ended up in a aluminum ball in a cornfield. And I don't know what prompted me to go look for that accident, that wreck, but I did. And this was a day or two afterwards. And I found it. And I found it in a cornfield, surrounded by corn that was probably 6 or 8 feet tall, except for the area immediately around this ball of aluminum where the corn was down on the ground, obviously, which was indicative of almost a vertical impact. And what really um, what really struck me is a couple of the seats in the airplane were not very far from the fuselage, and there were some empty shoes close to that. And the only thing that you could make out of that as being an airplane was the vertical stabilizer, the tail.
Yeah, it's amazing how much energy there is. And the average scud running accident is in level flight at cruise speed.
Yeah,
And we have to be particularly on guard, in my opinion, for those of us who are flatlanders like you and me and so many other places. We get it in our head, well, yeah, the ceiling is 1,000 feet, but I can fly along at 900 and it'll be okay because the highest spot in Florida is 300 feet. But there's towers that go up over 2,000.
they sure
And
are.
back in 2005, in Nebraska, flat as a pancake, Nebraska, there was a PA 28 140, guys flying along 900 feet, everything's great. And he hit a tower that went
Right.
to 1,066, sheared the wings off the airplane. And then it's just, gravity takes over. It's a ride to the ground. That's the real danger of these. We make an assumption that I can handle it and there is no obstacle. And whether that obstacle is a tower, and there are big ones all around America,
Yes, there are.
or whether it's a thing like the Mount Higby crash or so many others where we forget the ground is not flat everywhere and terrain rises. And I might be thinking, oh, I'm flying in a place that's fine. Yeah, but there's something higher than I am right now, right in front of me. But because of the weather, I can't see it. And by the time you do, there's no time to do anything about it. You're committed.
Yeah, here in Houston, we have, they call it the Tower Farm, the Missouri City Tower Farm, and there are 4 or 5 towers in a cluster. And the tallest one is over 2,000 feet, AGL. But about halfway between here and Beaumont, there's another, excuse me, there's another tower that's around 2,000 feet tall. And if you fly north out of here, going up towards the Dallas area, about 40 or 50 miles north of Houston, there's another tower in a straight line to a famous or to a popular place where we go eat oftentimes. It's again, it's a 2,000 foot tower. So if the ceilings are a little bit low, you have a 2,000 foot ceiling or something like that, and you're tempted to go fly, say, "Well, I'm safe. I'm 1,500 or 1,800 feet." Well, for the majority of a trip, you actually are. But if you don't know where that tower is, you aren't. So,
Yeah.
yeah, scud running is it's just a bad deal. Don't do it.
Well, and to your point with the cornfield accident, one of the things people don't think of, and this is true of instrument rated pilots who are unprepared as much as it is for VFR pilots who don't have instrument training. If you find yourself where the ceiling's coming down and down and down, and you're getting lower and lower, and you're like, well, I'll just get right up into the bottom of this because I don't want to get that close to the ground. Disorientation is a serious risk. And
Yes.
you can very quickly find yourself in a graveyard spiral or a stall and spin close to the ground because you just lost your reference to things. It's one of those things where we have to have the humility and recognize the hazardous attitudes, that macho thing. I can do this. You know, a lot of people have tried and a lot of them haven't made it. Maybe it's not worth the attempt. Scud
Yeah.
running is really, really bad. And it's one of those things that especially low time people I think are susceptible, but high time people with thousands of hours have done it. It's kind of like you'll meet non-pilots, Pat, who say, well, it's just fog. That's not that big deal. But the rain, yeah, we should probably not fly. Where in
Yeah.
reality, the rain's not that big a deal. The fog is a killer.
Yeah, once again, as you're talking, it reminds me actually of another event. This wasn't, I wouldn't call it scud running, but to your point of becoming disoriented or the possibility of becoming disoriented, this was Christmas, December, I should say. It's probably been 15 years ago or so, 10, 15 years ago. And we were going to fly down to a favorite Mexican restaurant that we had at the time. And it required that we fly south over the Sugar Land Airport and then turn east and fly south of those big antennas that I just told you about. And it was about 7 o'clock at night. It was absolutely gorgeous outside, dark, but gorgeous outside. Not a cloud in the sky, stars everywhere, big moon. And we took off, headed over Sugar Land, talked to the tower, got clearance through their airspace, made our turn around the towers, and the lights on the ground began to twinkle a little bit. And, it's the holidays, and I'm thinking, well, some of these folks have got their Christmas lights out early, but hey, it's really pretty until the lights disappeared entirely. And we find ourselves now in the clouds or a cloud. I'm not real sure, but it happened instantaneously. And of course, all my plates and charts are in the baggage compartment of the airplane because, hey, it's gorgeous, clear, and beautiful outside. And just for a split second, I found myself thinking, wait a minute, where are those towers?
Mm-hmm.
Now, knowing that we're not going towards them, but still, just momentarily, where are those towers? Which way can I turn to get out of this?
You know,
And
that's such a serious thing because people don't realize when they're on the ground saying, I'll take this chance because I can do it. When you're in that situation, the anxiety level starts going up, maybe all the way to the fear level. and you're not thinking clearly anymore.
Right.
You're not making rational decisions. You're short term. You may even be eyes inside the cockpit because you can't see well outside. Everything starts to cascade from there, and it becomes a real problem. I'll tell you, I had one a few years ago. I was flying a Cessna 152 from here in Central Florida up to headquarters in Frederick, Maryland. And I was coming out of Spartanburg, North Carolina, and the weather had degraded quite a bit, and the ceiling was pretty low, but the tops were low too, just a couple thousand feet. It was VFR at my departure point, and it was beautiful VFR at my arrival, at my destination. And I had plenty of fuel. So I just chose to get on top and fly VFR on top using pilotage instead of, or I'm sorry, using dead reckoning instead of pilotage. I've got a GPS. I know my heading. I know the wind. I've got great visibility up there. I'm very comfortable. Life is good. If something should happen, I can shoot an instrument approach into someplace, but because I'd be breaking out at like 1,000 or something, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But man, a lot of people might have made that choice saying, I don't want to be on top because I'm uncomfortable. I can't see the ground. I'll go under. Well, now you're into undulating territory underneath you. You've got mountains off to the west. You're really putting yourself in a box totally unnecessarily because, as we've said before, part of the GA experience, you might spend an extra day getting familiar with the local sights and sounds. I mean, you don't have to go. And that case with the guys I talked about who were both unfortunately killed in that accident when I was
Right.
a kid, could have called work and said, I'm stuck. I'm sorry. And what's the worst thing that could happen? I lose my job. Or
Yeah.
maybe I get docked in my pay. Or maybe the boss yells at me when I show up, but I'm alive. And
Yeah.
I still have a wife and kids, and they still have a dad.
Yeah.
By going, you're taking an enormous risk for really a relatively small gain.
Yeah, and you talked about the anxiety level, and we've talked about this before in previous episodes, but that stress hormone, cortisol, is not your friend. It'll make your brain freeze up and not work well. And I'm sure that that's what happened to me as I'm sitting there. Wait a second. Where are those towers? I know that it was that momentary, uh-oh, how did where am I going to go to get out of this? As it turned out, it took a second just to kind of wait a minute. They're over to the left. Let me turn to the right, and we made a 180 and got out of there and did a PIREP real quick. And it was just a little localized, very small localized little cloud, and we weren't in it for probably I don't know 30 seconds or so, if that. Seemed forever, but it wasn't. And we were able to get out. We flew back home and went and had some Mexican food at a place close to the house. So we still got our Mexican food, and we got a little flight in and some excitement at the same time. But it can happen. And the thing is, Jamie, that can happen to anybody. I don't care what your level of experience is. I don't care how good you think you are as a pilot. I don't whatever your confidence level is. This kind of stuff is insidious, and it can happen to anybody. And if someone thinks that it can't happen to them, oh man, it can.
Yeah, and that's why the FAA has those 5 hazardous attitudes. So we recognize that in ourselves and see
Right.
that we're doing something that's really not smart. So the moral of the story, Pat, is be conservative. Be willing to pull the plug and say no, or divert and land someplace. If those guys from my story had landed in Westerly, Rhode Island, or New Haven, they're on the ground. They could have rented a car. They could have called and had somebody pick them up. They
Yeah.
would have been late to work. Big deal. But there's always an option. Going is not necessarily the good one. And whether you're going to an airport you're familiar with and you've got comfort because of that, or you're going to a new destination where maybe you have trouble finding the airport under the best of circumstances, you're just stacking the deck against you. So really, when your CFI tells you don't scud run in your primary training, or when you're on your flight review and that topic comes up and well, what do you think? What is my limit? Set some personal minimums that make sense. And if your personal minimum, say, I want a ceiling of 3,000 feet and the ceiling is 1,200 feet, don't go, because you're putting yourself into a situation that can only get worse.
Yep, I totally agree. That's the reason for personal minimums.
Yeah, yeah. I have them, and I still tell people, write them down, put them in your logbook, someplace you can find them, and actually stick with them. If you want to change them down the road because you got an instrument rating or you've become more familiar with your airplane, great. Talk it over with a CFI and adjust them up or down as appropriate. But set those personal minimums and really adhere to them, because man, it's a sad day when somebody gets buried on a beautiful sunny day because they flew on a day that was just dog shit.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Hey,
right.
Pat, I think once again, we've covered a solid topic, and we've brought the wisdom of the Brown into this, and life is better because of it.
You were way too kind.
Well, I do appreciate you discussing this. And for those of you viewing, if you've ever had an experience with this, or if you've had a friend who told you the horror story of getting into a situation they weren't sure they could get out of, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Click like on the video and share it on social media, because this really is an issue in general aviation. There's an unnecessary amount of accidents directly attributable to scud running. So don't do it. Tell your friends not to do it. And rest assured, Pat and I will be at the restaurant having a nice cup of coffee and some pancakes rather than going and flying in that crap. Thanks a lot, Pat. We'll see you next time.
Adios.